The year is 1943. The sun, a sliver of molten gold, breaks over the horizon, painting the waters of an American harbor in hues of orange and steel. Through the morning mist, a ship glides, not a warship bristling with guns, but a convoy vessel, a liberty ship. Its belly full not of cargo, but of men. German soldiers. Prisoners of war. They press against the railings, their faces pale, eyes wide, squinting at the shore. The air is sharp, stinging with the scent of coal smoke, salt, and wet iron. Gulls cry overhead, their calls echoing a world away from the North African desert or the frozen Russian front. These men, veterans of the Africa Corps, fresh-faced conscripts, a hardened U-boat sailor, have been fed a steady diet of propaganda. Goebbels' voice, crackling over the radio, had promised them an America on its knees, starving, its cities bombed into rubble, its people broken. They were told the United States was a decadent society, hollowed out and collapsing under the weight of the war. They expected to see ruins. They expected to see desperation. Instead, they see this, an intact skyline piercing the dawn. A forest of cranes, motionless giants waiting to pluck cargo from 100 holds. Towering grain elevators, symbols of a nation overflowing with food. Factory smokestacks pump plumes of smoke into the sky, not from burning buildings, but from the relentless fires of industry. In the switchyards below, the rhythmic clank and shunt freight cars is a metallic heartbeat. A sound that speaks of endless resources of a logistical machine beyond their comprehension. Down the way, in the shipyards, the blinding blue-white light of welding torches dances across the hulls of new Liberty ships, being born from steel plates, even as others like this one return from the front. One young soldier, barely 20, who had shivered through the siege of Stalingrad, whispers to his comrade, This is not what they told us." The old Africa Corps sergeant next to him, his face a leathery map of sun and sand, just stares, his jaw tight. He remembers the scorched earth of Tunisia, the constant struggle for fuel, for ammunition, for a single canteen of clean water. He looks at the endless lines of trucks on the docks, the mountains of supplies, and a flicker of doubt, cold and sharp, enters his mind for the first time. The U-boat sailor, accustomed to the cramped, suffocating confines of his steel coffin, is overwhelmed by the sheer scale of it all, the sheer space, the sheer, unapologetic power on display. This scene played out in ports like New York, Hampton Roads in Virginia, and New Orleans. By the end of the war, over 370,000 German prisoners would make this journey. They were a logistical afterthought, a convenient human ballast for the thousands of Liberty ships returning empty after delivering the tools of war to Europe. But for these men, this first glimpse of America wasn't just a journey's end. It was the beginning of a profound, unsettling psychological battle. What does it do to a man, a soldier who has fought and bled for his homeland, to see with his own eyes that the enemy he was sworn to defeat possesses an abundance he can barely fathom? The illusion, so carefully constructed, begins to crack. The shock is palpable, a silent current running through the crowd of gray-green uniforms. If this is what America looks like from the water, what on earth lies inland? The question hangs in the air, unspoken but felt by every man. Their bewilderment is cut short. American MPs, their movements crisp and professional, begin herding them down the gangplank onto the solid ground of the enemy. The shouts are in a foreign tongue, firm but not brutal. They are marched towards waiting trains, long lines of simple, stark boxcars. The heavy wooden doors slide shut with a deafening thud, plunging them into near darkness. Through the wooden slats, slivers of the outside world appear, a flash of color. A billboard on the side of a building, a smiling family, and bold letters. Buy war bonds. Then the train lurches forward, and the city, this impossible vision of strength and plenty, begins to blur into the green promise of the American countryside. The journey into the heart of the beast had just begun. The clatter of the wheels is a constant, a grinding rhythm that marks the miles. The train barrels onward, away from the coast, deeper into the American heartland. Through the slats of the boxcar, the world outside is a blur of motion and strange new sights. At night, the sky doesn't go black. It glows a fierce, hellish orange over sprawling factory towns, the silhouettes of steel mills and smokestacks stark against the fire. This is a nation at full throttle, a continuous assembly line of war. By day, the scale is just as staggering. We pass through rail yards where tracks are layered 5, 10 deep, endless lines of freight cars stretching to the horizon. On parallel highways, convoys of trucks rumble past, a river of material flowing east. Inside the train, the air is thick with anticipation and the scent of coal smoke. Then, the train finally shudders to a halt. The doors slide open not to a desolate field, but to an organized, almost sterile reception. The first real meal. It's served on a metal tray, a stark contrast to the slop of the front. A slice of soft, white bread, a piece of actual meat, a steaming mug of coffee, and something they call pie. For men who'd been subsisting on black bread and thin soup for years, it's a shock. A quiet disbelief settles over the tables. This is a country at war? This abundance, while their own families back home are starving? It doesn't make sense. This was America's interpretation of the Geneva Convention, a document that would govern every aspect of their new lives. They are issued new clothes, coarse denim trousers and shirts stenciled with 2 large letters. PW, prisoner of war. It's a label, a new identity. They learn the rules quickly. Officers are segregated and exempt from labor. Enlisted men will work. They'll be paid for it, not in dollars, but in scrip, special camp currency to be used at the post exchange. The sheer logistics are mind-boggling. They hear the names of the places they're going, a sprawling network of over 500 camps hidden in plain sight across the continent. Camp Concordia in Kansas, Camp McCoy in Wisconsin, Camp Hearn in Texas, Algona in Iowa, each one a tiny self-contained city behind barbed wire. Life in the camp falls into a routine. The day begins before sunrise, not with a bugle, but with the distant, mournful sound of a factory whistle from a town miles away. It's a sound that stitches the days together, a reminder of the industrial giant just beyond the fence. Then the shrill blast of a guard's whistle for roll call. Men shuffle out of the barracks, the air still smelling of disinfectant and pine plank walls. Inside the camp canteen, shelves are stocked with items that feel like impossible luxuries. Bars of soap, razors, tins of peaches, even chocolate. On a bulletin board, American newspapers are tacked up next to heavily censored German ones. They show maps of the front lines, and for the first time, many see the true crushing scale of the Allied advance. A quiet tension simmers just beneath the surface of this ordered existence. In the barracks at night, the hardliners, the true believers in the Reich, hold court. They whisper threats, policing conversations, ensuring no one speaks of doubt or disillusionment. They call the others weak, their spirits broken by American white bread and coffee. But in hushed conversations away from the watchful eyes of the fanatics, others admit the truth. They talk about the endless factories, the miles of freight trains, the sheer, undeniable power they've witnessed. We never knew, one might say to another. We never knew it was like this. The factory whistle blows again, signaling the start of another day. But this morning is different. After roll call, they aren't dismissed. An officer stands before them holding a clipboard, the idling engines of buses audible just outside the wire. The routine is about to be broken. The camp commander begins to read from a list. Names are called out one by one, echoing across the silent yard. Work detachments. They're being sent out. To farms, to forests, to factories short on manpower. For some, it's the war effort pulled millions of American men off the farms and out of the forests, leaving a gaping hole in the nation's workforce. But across the heartland, a strange and unexpected solution was taking root. Far from the battlefields, German prisoners of war were being put to work, and the America they discovered was nothing like the propaganda they'd been fed. Let's shift our lens inland, away from the coastal camps and into the vastness of the American interior. Picture this: the high plains under a sky so wide it feels infinite. Here, gangs of German POWs, many of them city boys from Hamburg or Berlin, are learning the back-breaking rhythm of sugar beet farming. They watch wide-eyed as massive mechanical harvesters do the work of dozens of men. It's a far cry from the small family farms they knew. An old farmer, his face a roadmap of sun and wind, wordlessly presses a chipped mug of hot coffee into a young prisoner's hands. A simple gesture of humanity that crosses the chasm of war. Now jump south to the cotton fields of Texas. The sun is relentless. Prisoners wearing denim and straw hats drag long canvas sacks behind them. They're picking cotton, a plant most have only ever seen as a finished textile. The foreman, a Texan who doesn't speak a word of German, uses animated gestures and a patient smile to explain the concept of piecework. The more you pick, the more you earn. At the edge of a field, a small girl, clutching her schoolbooks, shyly practices her few words of German with the men on the other side of the wire fence, a surreal moment of innocence amidst a global conflict. Then travel east into the dense, humid pine forests of the deep south. The air is thick with the scent of resin. Here, pulpwood crews are at work. The roar that fills the forest isn't artillery, but the unfamiliar snarl of a chainsaw, a piece of technology that leaves the prisoners in awe. They're used to two-man saws and axes, not this mechanical beast that bites through a thick trunk in seconds. This was the deal. The Geneva Convention barred POWs from working in direct war industries, but agriculture and logging were fair game. They were vital to keeping the home front running. For their labor, the prisoners earned about 80 cents to $1 a day, not in cash, but in canteen scrip. Back in the barracks at night, this sparked lively debates. Should you spend your earnings on American cigarettes, a coveted luxury, or save up for a bar of Hershey's chocolate? These small choices were a sliver of freedom in a life of captivity. They could browse Sears catalogs, marveling at the sheer volume of consumer goods, a stark contrast to the rationed, war-torn economy they'd left behind. But this new world was full of baffling contradictions. In some towns, German prisoners were welcomed into local diners and served a meal, while the same establishments would refuse entry to African-American soldiers wearing the uniform of the U.S. Army. The prisoners, indoctrinated in a rigid ideology of racial purity, were bewildered. How could a nation fighting for freedom be so divided against itself? They saw a democracy that was at once incredibly generous and deeply, visibly segregated. It was a paradox they couldn't comprehend, one that revealed the deep complexities of the country holding them captive. Communication with home was a lifeline, but a heavily managed one. Letters arrived in bundles, snippets of news from a world away. Black bars of ink from the censor's pen would cross out entire sentences, leaving frustrating gaps. Prisoners learned to write in code, using carefully chosen phrases like "the treatment is good" or "we are well fed," to reassure families without triggering the censor. Red Cross parcels were like treasure chests, bringing a taste of home, a familiar sausage or a piece of Stalin, a potent reminder of the lives they'd been torn from. And so their days fell into a routine. Hard work under an American sun, followed by evenings back in the camp. Imagine the scene. The barracks are quiet except for the rustle of turning catalog pages and the faint sound of Glenn Miller's swing music drifting from a borrowed radio. Then the camp's news bulletin is read out, an announcer's voice detailing Allied bombing raids over the Ruhr Valley, describing the industrial. The fences hummed with the slow rhythm of the Midwest, but at night, a different pulse beat through the wire. We'd stand there, shadows in the dark, watching the trains. Not just one or two, but a long, groaning procession under the moon. Their flat cars heavy with the silhouettes of tanks, their sides bulging with crated aircraft parts. They were metal serpents, miles long, hissing steam as they carved their way across the plains, heading east, always east. It was a nightly ritual, a quiet, compulsory viewing of a power we couldn't comprehend. By day, from a distant sun-baked hill we were allowed to climb for exercise, we'd see it. A shipyard, miles away, hazy in the summer air. But even from that distance, the scale was staggering. We'd watch the cranes dip and sway, like colossal birds building a nest of steel. Hull after hull slid into the water, one after another, day after day. It wasn't just a factory. It was a birthing ground for an endless fleet. We tried to count them, but soon lost track. The sheer repetition was demoralizing. Then the numbers started to filter in, authoritative and cold, carried on the wind and in the guards' casual talk. We'd see it in the newspapers they gave us, part of their special projects, re-education. Papers like Asterisk, Der Rough Asterisk, The Call, filled with articles about a new Germany, about democracy. They'd show us newsreels too. Images of American factories churning out war machines at a pace that defied logic. By 1944, they said, the United States was producing more aircraft than the Reich, Japan, and Britain combined. More than 2,700 Liberty ships launched, they boasted. At peak production, one bomber every hour. One every 60 minutes. The newsreels showed mountains of synthetic rubber, rivers of molten aluminum, all produced right here, far from our U-boats and bombers. The blockade was a pinprick against this industrial ocean. The reaction inside the wire was a war in itself. Some men, the older ones mostly, would quietly pocket the newspapers. reading them in the privacy of their bunks, their faces grim. You could see the gears turning, the dawning, terrible understanding. But others, the hardliners, the true believers, would spit on the ground. Propaganda, they'd hiss, the word defeatist, a venomous accusation. Lies to break our will. The tension grew thick enough to choke on. Cell leaders, men who still saw themselves as officers of the Reich, enforced a brutal discipline. Loyalty was everything. Whispers in the latrines became threats by the mess hall. A questioning glance could earn you a shove in the dark. We all heard the stories, the rumors that turned out to be true. Like at Camp Tonkawa, where a man suspected of being an informer was found dead, his own comrades, his judge and executioner. Fear was a constant companion, a cold hand on the back of your neck. We weren't just prisoners of the Americans. We were prisoners of each other. I remember gripping the chain link fence one evening, the metal cold and unyielding against my palm. Another train was rumbling past, its rhythmic clatter a deafening heartbeat. The whistle screamed, a lonely piercing sound that seemed to mock our silence. Beside me, Klaus, a corporal from Stuttgart, just stared. His knuckles were white on the wire. For weeks we'd argued, debated, clung to hope and rumor. But watching V-Day, May 8, 1945. Outside the wire, America is erupting in cheers. But inside the camp, there's silence. Imagine it. The war is over, you survived, but you lost. The relief is staggering, but it's tangled with shame, with a strange gratitude for your captors, and a deep, gnawing fear of what comes next. What happens now? The end of the war wasn't a clean break. Many of these men weren't sent straight home to a defeated Germany. Instead, they were shipped to Britain and France for months, even years, of forced labor, helping to rebuild the countries their own had shattered. The last German POWs wouldn't leave American soil until well into 1946. A surprising number, remembering the life they'd witnessed here, would later apply to immigrate, hoping to return to the land of their captivity. Think back to that first morning in the harbor, the shock of the New York skyline. Now picture the last glimpse of America, seen through the window of a departing train. It's autumn. The grain elevators are bulging, fat with harvest. Store windows in small towns are full of goods you can't even name. Children, who a year ago might have stared in fear, now wave as the train of former enemies rolls by. The propaganda they'd been fed had met a different reality. Yes, America's industrial might, its sheer capacity to produce, had won the war. That was undeniable. But for the men on that train, the big ideas of history were often overshadowed by small, personal mercies. The taste of real coffee, the impossible softness of white bread, the firm, respectful handshake of a farmer after a long day in the fields. These were the moments that complicated everything, that planted seeds of admiration right alongside the sting of defeat. It wasn't a simple story of good versus evil. It was a human story, full of contradictions. Decades later, one of these former prisoners, now a successful businessman, stood as an honored guest on the floor of an American factory. A whistle blew, signaling the end of a shift. The sound was instantly familiar, echoing across the years from the canning plants and lumber mills of his youth. And in that moment, he knew. He could pinpoint the exact second long ago when his certainty about the war, about his enemies, about the world, had finally broken. It wasn't in a battle. It was here, in the mundane rhythm of American work. History isn't always found in the grand declarations of generals or the turning points of great battles. Sometimes it lives in these smaller moments. A single sound, a line of freight cars, a simple slice of bread. These are the details that can rewrite a life. If you want to hear more of these untold stories from World War II, stick around. Subscribe, and join us as we uncover the history that's hidden in plain sight. Thanks for watching.